Hanging in there. All right, here we go, guys. We are at 1 o'clock. So welcome, everyone. My name is Brittany Quickwarner. I am the president and CEO at the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. And I am excited to be joined by Chris Eyler. He is, I can see my sponsors here. Chris is with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who has been doing a ton of work at the federal level around the Paycheck Protection Program and some of the other business funding resources that have come through Congress during this pandemic. Chris represents the Northwest region of the country, and so he works with not only chambers, but also businesses across the the Northwest. So he's going to be able to give us a lot of information just around some of the federal advocacy, but then also specifically today, we're going to talk about how the Paycheck Protection Program has changed, but then also what is it businesses need to be thinking about when they're looking at trying to get forgiveness for some of those loans that they've applied for. So I will let Chris introduce himself, but I want to give you guys the run of the show. You're joining us via Zoom. Thank you and welcome. If you have questions, you can just type them in the chat. And after Chris is done with his presentation, we'll make sure that we can get those questions answered for you. If you're joining us on Facebook, welcome as well. You can go ahead and type questions in the Facebook comment section, and we have a staff person who's going to transfer those over to Zoom so we make sure that we can get all your questions answered. So before we get started, I want to make sure and say thank you so much to our annual sponsors for the Chamber. These sponsors not only came in to support a lot of the work that the Chamber's doing, but they came in to be, to get some visibility through the events that we, in a normal year, are able to produce. Given the crazy year that we're having and the virus that we're all enduring, we are incredibly thankful, and especially thankful this year for these sponsors for sticking with us and contributing to our ability to kind of shift and pivot what we're doing to be able to do some of these webinars. So you can see those sponsors there to my side. These are really incredible community businesses who we are so grateful for. So, all right, let's go ahead, and Chris, I'll pass it over to you. And if you are able to share your screen, otherwise I'll help make sure that can happen. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Thank you. Well, thank you, Brittany, and thank you all for joining me today. Again, my name is Chris Eyler. I am the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest region. And as Brittany explained, I primarily work with Brittany and her colleagues at all the state and local chambers in Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, to keep you all looped in on what the U.S. Chamber is doing at the federal level on behalf of the business community. As Brittany noted, today we're going to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and specifically the loan forgiveness aspect of the Paycheck Protection Program. But first, just a quick overview and reminder of how we got here. In late March, early April, Congress passed what they referred to as the CARES Act. The CARES Act, in addition to creating the Paycheck Protection Program, created or expanded a number of other federal programs to assist businesses throughout the pandemic, specifically to help businesses pay their expenses, in particular to continue paying their employees during the duration of the crisis. The most significant of these programs for small businesses was the Paycheck Protection Program. And the unique feature of the Paycheck Protection Program was that it is a loan that would convert to a grant. In other words, it's a forgivable loan if the loan proceeds were spent on payroll expenses, as well as a number of other eligible non-payroll expenses, including mortgage interest, interest on personal property loans, rent payments, and utility payments. As of the end of June, just under 4.9 million Paycheck Protection Programs loans had been issued, totaling roughly $521 billion. The average loan was coming in at about $107,000. In Oregon, over 62,700 businesses had received loans totaling just under $7 billion. One of the things I just want to make sure to point out here is that as of the end of June, there is still $125 billion in Paycheck Protection Program funding available. Plus, Congress did extend the authority for banks to make Paycheck Protection Program loans until August 8th. So I recognize that we're going to talk about the forgiveness aspect mostly today, but if you are a business that still needs assistance, or if you know of a business that still needs assistance and you have not yet obtained a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you can still receive a loan. Just go to any of the banks. I believe most of the banks in the Eugene area are still participating in the Paycheck Protection Program. You go to a private bank to get a Paycheck Protection Program loan, even though this is a federal program and it's federal money. The loans are issued by private banks. In addition to the banks will be the ones who make the decision on loan forgiveness. So again, there is still plenty of money left in the PPP. If you have not already received the PPP loan, you can still do so up until August 8th. That being said, as I indicated already, what we're going to really talk about today is the loan forgiveness process and the aspects of loan forgiveness and how you go about getting your PPP loan forgiven. So what we're going to talk about today, the loan forgiveness process, what happens to any portion of your PPP loan that is not forgiven, and what types of documentation do you want to make sure that you're keeping on hand to support all of the information that you put into your loan forgiveness application. So as far as the loan, for how much of your loan will be forgiven, this is really a three-part process. First, you have to determine the maximum amount of possible loan forgiveness based on your expenditures during the 24-week covered period of the loan. Second, you need to determine how much, if any, of that maximum amount will be reduced because you may have reduced payroll or you may have reduced your FTE count during that 24-week covered period. And then lastly, and this tends to be the most confusing part, you have to apply what's known as the 60% rule. The 60% rule stipulates that of the amount of the loan that is forgiven, 60% of that has to be spent on payroll expenses. So step one, as I said, is you need to determine the maximum amount of possible loan forgiveness. And this is fairly straightforward. It should be one of the easier parts of this process. Think back to when you took out your PPP loan and you did the calculation on how much money you needed to request in a loan. You looked at all of your potential payroll expenses as well as a number of other non-payroll expenses to come to that amount of money. You're going to do the same thing here. You're going to total up all of your payroll expenses and all of your specified non-payroll expenses, things like mortgage interest payments on personal property loans, any kind of lease payments you've made, as well as any utility payments. You're going to total that all up, and that's going to give you your the maximum amount of money that could potentially be forgiven. You're also going to need to determine the 24-week covered period in which you're going to add up all those expenses. Here, there are actually two potential 24-week periods. The first potential 24-week period is the 24-week period that begins on the day that your loan is dispersed to you. Or if you are a business that pays your employees on a biweekly or more frequent weekly basis, you can elect to have your 24-week period begin on the first day of the first pay period that begins after you get your PPP loan dispersed. So again, there's two potential 24-week periods. If you are a business that pays your employees on a biweekly or more frequent basis, you can either choose the 24 weeks beginning on the day you get the loan, or you can begin that 24-week period on the first day of the first pay period after you get your Paycheck Protection Program loan. If you do not have a biweekly or more frequent payroll schedule, then your only option is the 24-week period beginning on the day the loan is dispersed. Once you have chosen that 24-week period, again, going back to the first slide, you're going to want to look at all your payroll expenses during that 24-week covered period and add to your payroll expenses all of your specified non-payroll expenses, things like mortgage interest payments, rent payments, and utility payments.
Hey, Chris, can I stop there and ask a question?
Sure.
On that last slide. So when the PPP loan was originally drafted, it was an 8-week. And a lot of folks took out those loans expecting 8 weeks. How does that change? How does that, folks who calculated their original loan, got the loan given an 8-week?
Correct. So yeah, as Brittany is correct, under the original statute that created the Paycheck Protection Program, businesses had 8 weeks in which to spend the money that they received from their Paycheck Protection Program loan. On June 5th, Congress made a number of changes to the Paycheck Protection Program to give businesses more flexibility, which included giving businesses more time to spend the money. So a business, and this is where it gets a little confusing, and I apologize for this. If a business obtained a loan prior to June 5th, they have the option to stick with the original 8-week period, or they can elect to spend that money over the course of 24 weeks. Congress made this change because a lot of businesses were saying that they simply couldn't spend all the money in 8 weeks, or they needed more time to spend. They just needed more time to spend the money. Since Congress made that change, the Department of Treasury has put out some additional guidance stipulating that if you spend all of your Paycheck Protection Program loan money prior to the end of the 24-week period, say you spend it all in 14 weeks versus 24 weeks, once you've spent all the money, you can go ahead and apply for loan forgiveness. You don't have to wait until the end of the 24-week period. Again, this gets a little confusing. I recognize that. And just, a lot of the confusion around things like this is a result of the fact that when Congress passed the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program, they intentionally left a lot of ambiguities in the law in order to give the agencies more flexibility to implement the program. So, just to go back and sum everything up, for most businesses, you're gonna be looking at a 24-week covered period. But for businesses that got their loans at the front end of this program, you have the option to use an 8-week covered period. But that being said, the Department of Treasury has issued additional guidance, giving even more flexibility to businesses, saying that if you spend the money prior to the end of your 24-week period, you can apply for loan forgiveness once you've spent all the money, even if you haven't taken the full 24 weeks.
Great.
Does that clear as mud? I know.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So step 2. Now you've added up all of your payroll expenses and all of your eligible non-payroll expenses. You've determined your 24-week covered period. The next thing you need to do is ask yourself, did you make any reductions in pay, and did you make any reductions in your FTE count? So the first question, because under the Paycheck Protection Program, you can reduce wages by up to 25%. If you reduce wages by more than 25%, you're going to see some reduction in your loan forgiveness. So under the Paycheck Protection Program, for employees who earned $100,000 or less in 2019, or employees who were not employed in 2019, your loan forgiveness will be reduced for each employee whose average pay during your 24-week covered period is less than 75% of their average pay from the full quarter prior to the 24-week covered period. So what that means is that if at the end of the 24-week covered period, an employee's average pay is less than what their average pay was between January 1st and March 31st, you're going to see loan forgiveness reduced proportionately. Now, I say January 1st to March 31st because for most businesses that took out a Paycheck Protection Program loan, that is the immediate quarter prior to their 24-week covered period. However, if you take out a Paycheck Protection Program loan now, it's going to be the second quarter and not the first quarter, just to be clear. But for most businesses that have received Paycheck Protection Program loans, they're going to compare average pay during the 24-week covered pay period to the average pay during the first quarter of this year, which was January 1st to March 31st. And again, if it's less than 75% of their average pay, then there's going to be a proportional reduction in loan forgiveness. Likewise, if you reduce your average FTE count during the 24-week covered period, you're going to see some reduction in loan forgiveness. Now here, your loan forgiveness will be reduced if the average number of weekly full-time equivalent employees during that 24-week covered period is less than the average number of FTEs during one of 3 reference periods. And here you get to choose the reference period that you're comparing your average FTE count during your 24-week covered period to. The 3 potential reference periods are 1, February 15th, June 30th, 2019, 2, January 1st to February 29th, 2020, or if you're a seasonal employee or a seasonal employer, you can choose any consecutive 12-week period between May 1st and September 15th, 2019. Again, what you're going to do is you're going to look at your average FTE count during your 24-week covered period, and you're going to select one of these reference periods, and you're going to compare that average FTE count while you have the loan to one of the average employee count, FTE count during your chosen reference period. If your average FTE count during the time you have the loan is less than it was during one of during your chosen reference period, then you're going to see a reduction in loan forgiveness. Now, there are some exceptions, and they're very important exceptions. Because Congress and the Department of Treasury and SBA recognize that a lot of businesses, even though they're making every effort to bring employees back on board, a lot of times those employees just aren't coming back. They recognize that this is a problem, and so they've created a couple of exceptions. The first is that if you, the borrower, have made a good faith written offer to rehire the employee during that 24-week covered period, but the employee rejected it, that's not going to be held against you when it comes to loan forgiveness. Likewise, if during that 24-week covered period, the employee was fired for cause or voluntarily resigned or voluntarily requested a reduction in hours, that also will not be held against you. There are also 2 safe harbors, one with respect to the reduction in pay and one with respect to the reduction in FTEs if those FTEs were let go between a certain period of time. So if you've done all of your, on the reduction in pay, if you've done all your calculation and it looks like you're going to experience some reduction in loan forgiveness because you reduced employee pay, if you restore wages by the end of the year, December 31st, 2020, and the wages are greater or equal to or greater than the annual salary and hourly wage on February 15th, 2020, then you will avoid any loan forgiveness. With respect to FTE counts, here, Congress recognizes that a lot of businesses, prior to the creation of the PPP and passage of the CARES Act, a lot of businesses had to move very quickly to make a lot of business decisions to survive. As a result, businesses let employees go before they knew about the Paycheck Protection Program. Right. So here, any employee, if FTEs that were reduced between February 15th and April 26th of this year, if those FTEs are restored by December 31st to the level that existed on February 15th, you again will avoid any loan forgiveness. Now this is the most confusing part of this whole process, and that's the 60% payroll rule. Again, of the amount of the loan that is forgiven, the law stipulates that 60% of that must be dedicated to payroll expenses. The remaining 40% that can be spent on things like mortgage interest, rent payments, and utilities. But the law is very clear. Congress, when they passed the Paycheck Protection Program, they passed this program to first and foremost ensure that businesses can continue to pay employees. So they've stipulated that 60% of the amount forgiven must be dedicated to payroll expenses. So basically what you need to do here in order to determine your maximum eligible forgivable amount of the loan is take total up all of your payroll expenses, and then divide that amount by 0.6. That will give you your total maximum amount of loan forgiveness, both payroll as well as non-payroll expenses. So think of it this way. And I recognize this is a very simplistic calculation. If your payroll expenses during the 24-week covered period were $60,000, and you divide that amount by 0.6, that gives you $100,000. $100,000 is the maximum amount of your loan that can be forgiven. That means 60% of the loan is being dedicated to payroll, and the remaining 40% can be spent on those non-payroll eligible expenses. So the final part here is to determine how much of the loan is now going to be forgiven. And the amount that is forgiven is going to be the lesser amount of one of the following three. The first is your total Paycheck Protection Program loan amount. And this is the ideal situation because it means your whole loan, the entire amount is wiped out. The next potential amount that would be forgiven would be the maximum amount of loan forgiveness from step one. Remember, that's all of your payroll expenses plus the non-eligible or the non-payroll eligible expenses of mortgage, interest, rent, utilities, minus any of the reductions from step two. Step two were the reductions resulting in because you reduced pay by more than 25%, or your average FTE count was during the covered period was less than your chosen reference period. And then the third potential amount would be the maximum amount of loan forgiveness once you've applied the 60% rule. Again, the amount that is forgiven is going to be the lesser amount of one of these three calculations. Now, for a lot of businesses, the ideal situation is that the total amount of your loan is forgiven because you've spent all of your money on payroll and those eligible non-payroll expenses. You didn't violate the 60% rule. You didn't lower employee wages or FTE counts. But for a lot of businesses, there are going to be amounts of the PPP loan that are not forgiven. And for those amounts that are not forgiven, that converts to a traditional loan with a 5-year term at a maximum 1% interest rate. The first payment is deferred for 6 months, and there are no prepayment penalties or fees. So if you have the money available and you want to pay it off before the end of the 5-year term, you're more than welcome to do so, and you will not be penalized or charged any fees. Now, going back to the question that Brittany raised earlier, when Congress made those changes on June 5th, they also made some changes that affect this as well. Under the original Paycheck Protection Program and CARES Act statute, unforgiven amounts would convert to a loan with a 2-year term. So here, however, you don't get a choice. If you took your loan out before June 5th, when Congress made changes, any unforgiven amounts will convert to a 2-year loan with a 1% interest rate. Okay. If you took your loan out on or after June 5th, then the unforgiven amount converts to a 5-year term at a 1% interest rate. Again, this was made when Congress passed changes to the Paycheck Protection Program on June 5th in order to give borrowers more flexibility. And then lastly, you want to make sure, as with everything when it comes to the government, you want to make sure you're keeping as many records as possible to support the information that you're putting in your Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness application. Specifically, you want to make sure that you have enough payroll documents that reflect the amount of money you dispersed in payroll during the 24-week covered period. You also want to make sure that you have documentation showing what your average payroll was prior to taking out your PPP loan. Likewise, you want to make sure that you have documentation that reflects your average FTE count during the 24-week covered period, as well as documentation showing your average FTE count during your chosen reference period. And then finally, you want to make sure you have documentation backing up any mortgage payments you made, any rent payments you made, any utility payments you made during your 24-week covered period. The good thing here is that when you look at the PPP loan forgiveness application instructions that you download at the Department of Treasury's website, as well as at the SBA's website, they both have these documents. The final 2 pages of the instruction document, it spells out in quite a bit of detail the types of documents that are representative of the types of documents that they are going to ask you to have on hand to support things like your average payroll, your average FTE counts, and the types of payroll and the types of non-payroll expenses you have during that 24-week covered period. So you'll want to look at the application instructions pretty closely to make sure that you have those types of documents on hand. So finally, I recognize that this is a lot of information that I've gone through very quickly, and a lot of it can be a bit confusing. So the U.S. Chamber has developed a very short 4-page step-by-step guide document that walks you through this process. You can download it on our website at uschamber.com/PPP forgiveness. It mirrors a lot of the information that I put in the slides I used today. But as I said, the intention is to distill a lot of the information in the forgiveness instructions on the Department of Treasury and SBA's website to make it a little more digestible to you and a little more easier to understand. Likewise, on our website, we have a number of other documents, guide documents that walk through a lot of the things that small businesses in particular should be asking themselves as they reopen, the resources they should be looking to get the best and most current guidance from state and local health authorities, as well as some sample things like a sample health questionnaire, and other resources that will help you better serve your customers as you reopen. And the last thing I just want to say is, I've mentioned it a couple times, when the CARES Act was passed, and the PPP in particular, Congress left these programs particularly, they left a lot of ambiguities in the law in order to give the agencies a lot of flexibility in implementing these programs. Because of that, there are a lot of questions that come up, both in obtaining a PPP loan as well as getting forgiveness from a PPP loan. As you're going through this process, if you have questions, if you're curious, if you're wondering if this expense qualifies as an eligible non-payroll expense, do not hesitate to reach out to your lender to get better guidance from them on how they will treat that when they're reviewing your forgiveness application. The bank that you got your loan from is the bank you're going to go to apply for forgiveness, and the bank is going to make the decision on what is and what is not forgivable. So if you have questions, don't make assumptions, don't guess, just give them a call, go talk to them and ask them, because there are a lot of particular things that Congress did not envision when they passed this program that have not been addressed yet in guidance or in statute. So it's going to be a lot of it's going to be up to the bank. The other thing I just want to impress upon you is, as you go through this process, and I'm sorry, Brittany, to put you on the spot, but as you go through this process, please relay any kind of concerns or types of questions you're getting to Brittany. I, along with my colleagues in all of the other regional offices across the country, we have been on webinars like this pretty much nonstop for the past 4 months. We've been attending virtual meetings with Brittany and all of her colleagues at the chambers across Oregon, and as well as across the region, and getting a lot of feedback on the real world implications of how this program is being implemented and how it's affecting businesses. And that feedback that we've been getting from Brittany and her colleagues has directly informed our advocacy efforts in Washington, D.C. And a lot of it's resulted in changes made through guidance by the Department of Treasury and SBA. But a lot of the changes that Congress made on June 5th to make these programs more flexible, lowering the threshold of the amount of money that has to be spent on payroll, giving businesses more time to spend the money, giving businesses more time to cure some of the reductions in payroll and FTEs. That is directly related to the feedback that we have gotten from local chambers of commerce. So I assure you, as you're venting your frustrations with this program to Brittany, and she is venting them to me, it is being heard back in Washington, D.C., and we are getting a lot of these changes made. So again, please, do everything you can to relay these things to Brittany, because she is relaying them to me, and we are making sure that your congressional delegation and the various agencies that are administering these programs are hearing these concerns. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. I have a couple, and then we do have some that have come through the chat. So Chris, is there a timeline that you have to apply for forgiveness? One of the reasons I asked, so obviously the change from the 8 weeks to 24, there's some who they were expecting it to be 8 weeks, so they spent it all. You said they can apply whenever, essentially. Mm-hmm. If you are worried because you couldn't spend all of it in those 8 weeks, but now you have 24 to spend it, you might be stretching that out a little bit more to make sure you spend everything that the eligible pieces, so you get 100% forgiveness. But one of the components is if you reduce staff or reduce pay, you have until the end of the year to get that average back up. So do you wait till the end of the year to reapply for forgiveness?
You have up until the end of the year to apply for forgiveness.
Okay. Okay, so if you want to get it in those 24 weeks, so if you were an 8-week applicant, but you weren't able to spend all of that money that you received on payroll in those 8 weeks, continue to spend it on that payroll so you can get it forgiven.
Yes.
So one of the questions, you can spend more than 60% on payroll, right? You could spend 100% of the loan that you got on payroll and you're safe.
Yes, correct. The minimum amount that you can spend on payroll is 60%. But if you want to spend 75, 80, 100% on payroll, go for it. The primary intention of the Paycheck Protection Program, it's implied in the name. It's to pay your employees. Congress, they want you. They're giving this money. They're making this money forgivable because they want businesses to keep their employees on the payroll, irrespective of whether they're actually open or doing business.
Yeah. So, someone asked the question, what if your business closes during the 24 weeks? As in, like for good, closes its doors.
Well, you'd still be able to apply for forgiveness and be eligible. It goes back to, like, if you can continue paying your employees, even if you're closed, that Congress is fine with that. Again, like the reason that they're making these loans as flexible as possible is so that businesses who don't have any revenue coming in, they can continue paying their employees. And that's why they've made it forgivable. There's also a part of the safe harbor that says that if you cannot bring employees back on during that 24-week covered period because of public health guidance, social distancing requirements, that also is not going to count against you with respect to reduction in loan forgiveness. But if you do close, you can still apply for loan forgiveness and get loan forgiveness.
Okay. So I know it was in talks when the Senate just a couple days ago did decide to extend the deadline from June 30 to August 8th for businesses to be able to apply for a second round, but that didn't end up finalizing, right?
So far, that right now under the law as passed by Congress, you can only get one Paycheck Protection Program loan. There are discussions, as you indicated, to make businesses able to get a second one, but right now that has not passed.
That has not passed yet. Okay. And
I think, just building on that a little bit, Congress is out of session this week and next, but when they come back into session, it's expected that they're going to begin negotiations on a potential phase 4 economic stimulus package. And there are a number of things that could be addressed in that package related to the PPP. This is one of them. one of the other things that we are hoping to get addressed in that package is that all 501c nonprofits can be made eligible for PPP. Right now, only 501c3s and 501c19s, which are veterans organizations, can get PPP loans. We want to expand that to all nonprofits, in particular 501c6s, which are local chambers of commerce. Another thing that we are looking to do to make this process even more flexible and less burdensome on businesses is have the law stipulate that any loan amount of $150,000 or less would just be presumed forgiven. Again, that is something that's going to require a legislative change that has not yet been made, but it's something, you know, the feedback we're getting from a lot of our small business members is that the loan forgiveness process is a bit burdensome and can be costly. And so given that most of the loans, the average loan is $107,000, this would be tremendously helpful if we could get that change made.
Yeah. Someone asked, are employees who make more than $100,000 annually included at all in the payroll costs eligible?
It's their salary up to $100,000.
Okay. So anything over 100 is
that wouldn't be eligible for forgiveness.
Included, but up to 100 can be included in that.
And it wouldn't have even gone into the calculation when you applied for the loan.
Okay, that's what I figured. So someone says, I'm an independent contractor. How does my PPP work with unemployment since it is a loan for my salary, but might be forgiven later? I also have an EIDL loan and need to know how that works too and reporting on the EIDL loan. I don't know if you know much about the EIDL reporting.
Well, so if you obtained an EIDL loan and you received that emergency grant that was up to $10,000, the amount that you received in an EIDL emergency grant would reduce your loan forgiveness under the PPP. With respect to the unemployment and the PPP, I'm not entirely sure. Because if you have a PPP, you likely wouldn't be collecting unemployment too.
Right. Yeah. Aaron, if you have a clarifying comment there to help understand that question better, feel free to type it in there. Otherwise, I'm happy to chat offline to try and help you find that answer too. Kara asked, do we know if they will be releasing a newer modified loan forgiveness application? The easy application restricts the forgiveness to the lesser of the full amount or what was spent on payroll. We understood that 100% would be available. 100% forgiveness would be available if they met the criteria.
That I don't know. This is one of those things where Treasury and the SBA have been putting out new guidance and updating their documents, on an almost daily basis. It seems like at times. So it could happen. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next week. I don't know.
Okay. So from what I understand, though, to go through the forgiveness process, you go to the SBA's website or the Treasury, you download the forms, do your best to fill that out, collect the paperwork, but then go talk to your loan officer. And I assume they can help you walk through if you have questions on which pieces are eligible, which aren't, etc.
Correct.
Okay, good. So it is someone here local in this community. You don't have to worry about having to sit on hold for, 3 days with someone at the SBA to get an answer for that. You are working with your local loan officers for the PPP forgiveness, which is good news. Someone asked, in Oregon, you can be partially furloughed and are eligible for the work-share program, allowing fractional unemployment benefits. Okay, so maybe that's,
that is a good example of the type of thing. Work with your lender on that.
Because what I would understand then is the part that your company is paying of the work share is likely the component that will be forgivable.
Right.
The state, obviously, their contribution of the work share program is not going to be forgiven in your loan. Let's see, I had another question about. So you can apply for forgiveness as soon as you've used up the amount. So there are definitely companies who've already gone through that 8-week period and they've used that amount. So you can go ahead and start applying for that. So for the folks who, and I kind of said this earlier, but I want to make sure I'm clarifying. My husband has a small business. He received a PPP loan. So I've been trying to help him navigate this as well. So some of these questions are actually coming from like me personally working through this with him. So I appreciate this. So the original 8 weeks, if you're beyond that, so he thought he had to be done with it already, but he still had some money that he wasn't able to spend. So he thought he was going to have to pay it back, et cetera. That he could actually continue to pay, and other businesses, I assume, are in this situation, add, 5 more weeks to that to continue to pay staff to actually get to that 60% in payroll.
Right.
To then apply. Okay.
But remember now, so say you're in that category of businesses that is under the original law and can choose 8 weeks or up to 24 weeks. If you go beyond, as long as you have the outstanding loan and have not applied for loan forgiveness, all of the restrictions with respect to reductions in payroll, reductions in FTE counts are going to still apply. So if you're still spending your PPP loan, keep in mind that you cannot, you run some risk of losing loan forgiveness if during the time you're still spending the money, you reduce payroll or you reduce your payroll or your FTE count.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, this is super helpful. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions. I don't see any questions here in the Zoom chat. I don't know if I'm assuming Heidi's pulling them over from Facebook. I'm curious, since we have you, Chris, can you talk at all a little bit more about that round 4 and timing when, like what you guys are, kind of reading as far as tea leaves go at the federal level for the appetite that the Senate or the House has for passing a round 4? Kind of what are some of the, what are the negotiating terms between those two bodies when we're talking about this round 4 of a stimulus?
Sure. So first of all, we still feel fairly confident that there is going to be some sort of round 4 large scale package. What's in that bill? That's open for a lot of discussion right now. The House of Representatives, prior to Memorial Day, passed what they refer to as the HEROES Act. This is largely seen as Speaker Pelosi and House Democrats' opening offer in the negotiation on the Phase 4 bill. It's not the word for word text of the HEROES Act is not something that's seen as likely to become law, but it's worth looking at to see where they're going to be coming from in this negotiation. The HEROES Act was in total a $3 trillion package. $1 trillion of that is directed at state and local governments. They also include another round of payments to individuals and families. They would extend the $600 extra in unemployment insurance provided by the federal government. They do make a number of the changes we'd like to see in the Paycheck Protection Program. Most importantly, they expand it to all nonprofits, specifically 501c6 chambers of commerce. And they make a number of other changes that I apologize, they're not on the top of my head right now.
That's okay, yeah.
As for the Senate, it's really, we haven't seen a proposal from the Senate yet. The one thing we do know is that Senator McConnell, the majority leader, has indicated that he's not going to allow any legislation to go through the Senate that does not include liability protections for businesses. There is a real concern out there from businesses, particularly small businesses, that they may be targeted with lawsuits arising from this crisis. And one of the priorities that the U.S. Chamber has laid out as we formulate our advocacy on the Phase 4 bill is that we want to see liability protections included for small businesses or for businesses in general. But I think, to be clear, we are not asking for blanket protections from liability. What we're asking for are temporary protections targeted at claims arising from coronavirus that provide a safe harbor for businesses that make a good faith effort to follow public health guidance.
Yeah.
So if you're a business and you're following the public health guidance, you're requiring masks, you're doing everything possible to maintain social distancing, you're cleaning, you're screening your employees for potential health risks, you're doing all the things that the government is asking you to do. We want to make sure that you're not going to be targeted for liability. Now, if you're engaged in willful misconduct or gross negligence, or you're someone who's out there saying, to hell with what the government says, I'm reopening and doing what I've always done, then you're not necessarily going to get that kind of you're not necessarily going to be eligible for the type of protection. We want to protect the businesses that are doing their part, following guidance, and doing everything possible to protect both their employees and their customers. Likewise, a lot of businesses during this crisis, they stepped up to help fill a very big void in the supply of protective gowns, face masks, face coverings, hand sanitizers. We want to make sure that those businesses are protected too, particularly the ones that retooled their production lines. They may not be businesses that were making these things to begin with, but again, if they were making a good faith effort and following best practices, public health guidance, we want to make sure that they're protected. A couple of the other things that we're going to be looking at, there are increasingly concerns that schools are not going to be reopening in the fall. And if schools are not open, that has a direct relation to businesses' ability to have their employees come back, because those employees won't have care for their kids. So we want to make sure that we're looking at options for ways the federal government can help with respect to childcare. There's also, as we start to get hopefully past this crisis sooner rather than later, there are still going to be a lot of businesses that are going to be negatively impacted, irrespective of how open the economy may be, because people simply aren't going to want to be going to businesses like restaurants, hotels, movie theaters, bars, concert venues, any kind of business that requires a lot of customers in order to be profitable. Those businesses are going to be the slowest to recover. So we're going to have to look at some options to provide assistance to those types of businesses, beyond what's, in what does that look like? Is that just an expanded PPP loan, or is it something else? So we're going to be looking at options to help those types of businesses. As far as timing goes, I think I already said Congress is out of session this week and next, but we fully expect that when they come back, the first order of business is going to be sitting down for negotiations on what a phase 4 bill looks like. There continues, we remain optimistic that this is going to happen, but both sides, there are a lot of differences between House Democrats and Senate Republicans, but right now we still see those differences as bridgeable, and we hope to see something either by the end of July or the beginning of August.
Great, thank you. I did have another question pop in here about the PPP. Someone says, if a 501c3 furloughed or laid off staff, are they still eligible for forgiveness? It's in the same kind of average employee number.
Right. Well, you would be eligible for forgiveness, but that forgiveness could be reduced based on how much of your staff was laid off. Now, remember, if you furloughed them or laid them off during that window, February 15th to April 26th, if you bring those folks back on board by the end of the year, you would avoid any reduction in forgiveness.
That's great. So Amy, it sounds like if you are able to bring those folks back and their average gets back to where it was, then you could potentially still be eligible for the full forgiveness. Hopefully that helps answer your question. All right. Well, if there's not any other questions, I really appreciate your time, Chris. This has been super helpful. We know that a lot of folks who were in during that first, 8-week period are coming up to the end of their forgiveness. And so a lot of folks are kind of looking at what forgiveness looks like for them. So this is really timely and helpful. I look forward to chatting with you more. And if we're able to get around for pass through Congress, then perhaps we'll have you back to talk a little bit more about that.
That'd be great. Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you jumping on. We will have this webinar recorded. So it will be up on our website, and we'll send out the links that were in this PowerPoint to the folks who signed on the Zoom account, so you guys can make sure to have access to that. Again, just a huge thank you to our sponsors, OCCU, Bushnell University, Wells Fargo, US Bank, Moss Adams, Northwest Community Credit Union, Peace Health, and Kaiser Permanente. Thank you again so much for your annual sponsorships. We really appreciate it. All right, everybody have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, Chris.